Alrighty guys, it is Qaaman here today, and I'm bringing you another Dragon Ball Z segment, bringing you my review on episode 2. And as you guys would have seen in my first Dragon Ball Super review, and also for my predictions, I'm going to do a review, and I'm also going to do a predictions for every single episode here on out for the rest of the series. And in this video, I'm going to be discussing, as I said before in the previous one, where I'll discuss the plot, the action, interesting details, overall impressions, and my overall thoughts on the episode as a whole. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into this video. So, let's start off by talking about the plot. Now, this episode actually started off very similar to episode 1 in the sense that there really wasn't much of a serious plot taking place. In this episode, we really saw, Vegeta going on a trip with his family. Kind of what we saw in episode 1. We saw a little bit more of Goku's side to things in this lighthearted tone. And quite honestly, guys, I thought this episode was really cool because it started off with a very, very comical tone, and then it got a little bit more serious later on in the episode, where we see that hero on the unknown planet that's fighting like this huge dinosaur-looking creature, and essentially Beerus wanted some of the dinosaur meat. The guy refused, and he basically fought Beerus, and the whole planet basically got destroyed because of that. And I actually kind of like that because it kind of shows us two sides of things. It's very good whenever Dragon Ball has like a very comical tone mixed in with a lot of the serious moments, and that's one thing that I really, really liked about this episode. There really wasn't much in terms of plot development, but this episode was obviously created to show character development. As we see, Vegeta's going on that trip. That's something that we would have never expected Vegeta to do. It's not in his personality, it's not in his character, and it's not in us as fans to expect him to do something like that. So I do like the fact that they kind of added that at the beginning, and Bulma was saying, how she's noticing that he's changing, and that obviously shows that Vegeta's becoming a lot more lighthearted in himself, even though, he wasn't very touchy, and he eventually just said, to HFIL with this, and basically just flew away when, he was at that Hawaiian-looking party. So I really, really enjoyed the plot. It was lighthearted. It wasn't serious. No major things took place, but obviously this is setting us up for the next arc that's going to take place. And we obviously saw, Vegeta and Goku training, which is going to lead us into the whole Battle of Guards arc. But the plot was pretty solid if you ask me. So, similar to what Trev's Chan 2 talks about with Walking Dead, you cannot have a Dragon Ball episode without talking about the action. And similar to episode 1, there wasn't that much action in this episode. However, I do like what we actually got to see in this episode as a whole. And we saw 3 action sequences. 2 of the action sequences were actually training sequences where we see Goku like basically carrying like a huge amount of weight on his back when he was actually on King Kai's planet. He was actually like grabbing it and pulling it around the planet. And we also see that when we see Vegeta in the gravity chamber, he's like dodging all of these energy blasts at 150 times gravity, which I'm going to discuss in a second when I talk about the interesting details about that, with it being 150 times gravity. But the big action sequence in this episode was what we were seeing in some of the previews, where we actually saw like Beerus fighting this big red monster. I talked to Rhymestyle about this before, and we didn't actually know what exactly it was at first. But now we actually got to see it, and it was actually really cool. I mean, quite honestly, guys, it wasn't a big action sequences because Beerus is basically like deflecting everything the guy did with one finger, and he blew up the planet effortlessly. But I did like that we got to see like, a different alien race. I like how we got to see like the guy fighting that huge dinosaur thing. And when he actually started fighting Beerus, I admire the guy's courage, because on his planet, he's ridiculously powerful. He had the ability to fly. He had electricity surging around him. And, he goes up against the god of destruction. Although Beerus is obviously significantly stronger than him, I do like that, there was an action sequence where the guy actually tried his best. And although, he transformed and he wasn't able to beat Beerus, that was a little fun sequence we got to see in it. But as far as action is concerned, obviously it wouldn't be that much, but it was fun to watch, another character get the spotlight. And I'm going to discuss in the interesting details more so about my thoughts on that character as a whole. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little part where I discuss the action sequences of this episode. So I wanted to discuss 3 interesting details that I observed about this episode, and the first thing I wanted to talk about is Vegeta training at 150 times gravity. And I'm sure a lot of you kind of raised your eyebrow about this, because as we actually saw in Dragon Ball Z, even though this was more shown in the anime adaptation, in the manga we never really saw any major training sequence. we actually saw Vegeta training at more than 150 times Earth's gravity because he wanted to surpass Goku. So you would think if Vegeta can do more than that in the Saiyan Saga, where he's nowhere near as strong as he is now, why would he be training at 150 times gravity? Well, I was talking to Geekdom about this, and Geekdom made a very, very interesting point when it comes to weight training. And obviously, you know, if any of you who go to the gym, you would know this too, where sometimes it's not just about the amount of weight that you're using, it's about the way that you utilize it. Like sometimes if you go to the gym and you're using like 10 pounders, like depending on the actual type of exercise you're doing, it can actually be more beneficial to certain parts of your body as opposed to just doing straight up weightlifting yourself. And I kind of relate this to Vegeta's case. He's not just doing, you know, regular just punches and kicks. Like, he's actually, you know, testing his actual speed out in this episode where he's, like, dodging all of those ki blasts, you know, from those machines. So I really, really found that an interesting aspect of this episode. It was more about his mobility as opposed to actually, you know, like, actually training and, like, moving his weight in the actual gravity itself. Even though it's moving his weight, he's moving it in a completely different way, more in a much more evasive way. As we saw in the anime, he was training, you know, just doing punches and kicks a lot more, doing push-ups to get his body strong enough for the weight. So I can still see the benefit of him actually using that weight, but I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. However, moving on to the next aspect, this is a little bit more of curiosity. One interesting thing I noticed is that when Goku was carrying that ridiculous amount of weight on his back, I've always been curious as to how much that actually was, because that seemed like a huge amount of weight, and Goku was struggling a lot to actually pull it. And considering the fact that, you know, King Kai is on a planet that multiplies the amount of weight by 10 times because it's 10 times the gravity, you would think that Goku's carrying a ridiculous amount of weight. And if you guys just ballpark it, just share your thoughts in the comment section below how much weight you think Goku is carrying. I'm very curious. I have no idea. I know it at least has to be at least in the thousands of tons. And he's doing this in his base form. And this is a Goku who's much stronger than the one who was using the weights, you know, in the actual training segment where we see Goku in the other world. And that actually was an actual canon, you know, scene, because we actually did see that little scene in the manga too. So I'm actually curious what you guys think in terms of how much, you know, weight Goku was using. And the last point I wanted to talk to you guys about is dealing with that red guy, or the hero of that unknown planet who fought Beerus. How strong do you guys think that guy is? And I think that guy is at least Saiyan Saga tier for several reasons. Number one, when he was powering up, and Josh from Dragon Ball Nation was pointing out that electricity, even though I think electricity has done a lot more for effect, it is used to illustrate a person of great power. And when you consider the fact that he had electricity auroring around him, he had the ability to fly, he had the ability to generate energy, and I mean, and he did one-shot that huge dinosaur-looking creature in one hit. And although obviously you wouldn't be that impressed because the dinosaur wouldn't be that strong, to one-shot a dinosaur that easily would lead me to believe that he's definitely above Goku in Dragon Ball type of power, and I would probably put him at least Saiyan Saga tier minimum. I'm very curious to hear what you guys think. Obviously, all of these characters would be nothing to Beerus, considering the fact that Beerus can one-shot a Super Saiyan 3 Goku with the chopped neck, even though the whole canonicity of Battle of Gods is up for question. I'll discuss that more in the predictions. But I'm very curious to hear your thoughts in the comment section as to how strong you think that red guy was, and share your thoughts. I personally think minimum Saiyan Saga or higher, but I'm really curious to hear what you think. But this concludes my interesting details on this episode. So, overall, my impressions of this episode was that it was very, very, very comical in nature, and I really, really enjoyed that. I really loved a lot of the scenes with Vegeta, where he's going on a trip with Bulma. I like the scene where we start off where we see him on the ship, and Bulma's like trying everything in her power to like annoy Vegeta from like being so still on the top of the ship. I really enjoyed that part. And I also like the scene where we see like the octopus like ooze in Vegeta's face, and like he's completely black and he's pissed off. And I also like how Vegeta was shown to have like a serious appetite similar to Goku. That's obviously you know, a huge Saiyan trait, because we also saw Trunks eating a lot too, and you know, the whole ice cream thing and them on the little train. I really liked a lot of those scenes because it's very, very out of character for Vegeta. And, you know, I felt a lot of those scenes were obviously aimed to help, you know, the fans laugh and kind of set us up for the more serious things that we're going to see in the actual series itself. But another impression that I had, and I really, really, really have been kind of, you know, neutral on this, because a lot of people haven't really agreed with me on this. I think that Beerus is portrayed a lot more of a villain in Dragon Ball Super than he was in Battle of Gods. In Battle of Gods, you know, we saw him, he was kind of like this naughty guy who was willing to blow up a whole planet because, you know, he didn't get pudding or, you know, things along those lines, and he was being very strict to King Vegeta and Frieza and all that stuff. You know, obviously Frieza was told, you know, not to ever, you know, interact with Beerus. We don't know, you know, the extent of their relationship. But I feel like in Battle of Gods, because Beerus essentially just blew up 2 planets at the beginning, one for dinosaur meat and one because the food was greasy, he's given off a much more villainous appearance in Dragon Ball Super. Like, I look at Beerus as a bad guy, whereas in, you know, Dragon Ball Z and Battle of Gods and Forgotten to Know If, he's given off a naughty personality. I feel like Beerus is like a bad guy now, and maybe that could be, you know, obviously emphasized a lot more in the series, you know, than obviously the movies could do. But that's just my overall impressions of this. It's obviously adding more towards Beerus, and, you know, the Kais are very, very, very concerned about Beerus for a reason. So those are my overall impressions, you know, the main things that I took out of this episode. And I hope you guys enjoyed this segment for the impressions of Dragon Ball Super Episode 2. So guys, that has been my video for today. There was no Piccolo in this episode, unfortunately, but because I felt this episode had a bit more action than the previous episode, and because of the fact that I felt this episode was funnier in nature, I'm going to have to give this episode a 5 stars, because if I gave 5 stars to the previous one, I obviously have to give 5 stars to this one. I really enjoyed this episode. I do want to see the mood change a little bit more. I mean, I love the lighthearted aspects of Dragon Ball Z. It's really fun to see the characters in a peace world. But at the same time, I do kind of want to get back to the serious Namek Android Saga type of, you know, seriousness that we saw in Dragon Ball Z. Also the Saiyan Saga too, which was also very serious. Now, I think a lot of you also kind of want to see a mix too, but the lighthearted moments are nothing to brash at. I love this episode. Give it a 5 stars, and I hope, you know, you guys share your thoughts in the comment section below, and, you know, share your thoughts on what you're liking about the series so far, what you're disliking. And I'm obviously going to talk a lot more about the rewriting and a lot of my thoughts on what I expect to see, you know, in episode 3 coming up in my predictions video that will be uploaded tomorrow. So most importantly, over everything else, please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys, and I hope you guys enjoyed the blooper. I always try to put bloopers in if they're there. But we also saw Vegeta later on in the episode where we saw him training. And I found this kind of weird because I'm sure that many of you were probably thinking,